Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for those of you who are introducing yourselves in the chat. If you haven't gotten a chance to yet, please feel free to drop in our chat, introduce yourselves, let us know where you're tuning in from, anything that you'd like to share about the communities or the work that you're supporting. Welcome, Virginia, USA, Vancouver, Edmonton, from Ghana, wow, all over. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Tashaila Bailey, and I'm the program lead of Canada's Placemaking Community. We're really excited to lead another awesome mobilizer session, really as an opportunity for us to engage in shared learning, invite folks from our community of practice and beyond, our partners and other organizations that are really passionate about placemaking and community building efforts to join us online for about an hour and a half, just to share ideas, to share experiences, and really create an opportunity where folks can learn from one another. A couple of tech pieces before we jump into today's session. We do have the closed captions enabled for folks. If anybody would like them on, you are able to access that by clicking the CCs at the bottom of the screen. We also will have a member of the team checking in through the chat if there's any tech issues that come up for folks. If there's any questions that you have about the content, we encourage you to leave your comments in the chat throughout, and myself or a team member will be able to respond to them. And we also are running this session both in English and French today. So if anybody is interested in listening in French, you're able to click on the global icon that is at the bottom of your screen and listen into our French channel. To start us off today, I would like to acknowledge that while this session is happening online, that we're collectively based on traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities across Canada. I'm joining you all today from the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Métis peoples, what is known as Newmarket, Ontario. And we recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and the setting for all of our work. I also would like to give a special shout out today to our interpreters that are supporting us online. We have Louis and Yannick, and we also will be producing a graphic recording of this session, sort of a visual summary of the main topics and ideas that come up through our conversation that you all will have access to in a follow-up email. At this time, I would like to invite our host, Joy Sami from Park People, to kick us off with a wonderful presentation. Welcome, Joy.
Hi, and thank you, and welcome everyone. I am going to share my screen and get going. So bear with me for a moment. Okay, great. Awesome. I got the thumbs up. So today's session is called Placemaking in Urban Parks, the Benefits of Connecting People with Nature. And my name is Joy, and I work with an organization called Park People. And I'm your presenter for today, but I want to acknowledge the contributions of Laura and Sarah, who are my colleagues at Park People, who are the folks who did all the research that I'm actually going to share with you today. And you can reach out to us after. I'll share our contact information. So a little bit about Park People. Park People is the only national bilingual organization solely dedicated to championing city parks in Canada. Since 2011, we've collaborated with thousands of community leaders, nonprofit park organizations, and park professionals to advance city parks as essential spaces to connect people to each other and the rest of nature, and to realize the incredible potential of our urban green spaces to make cities better places to live. We believe that parks are vital to the health of Canadian cities and our environment, and that everyone, regardless of their income, identity, ability, or age, deserves equal access to the benefits of public green space. So Park People works by activating parks, building networks among organizations that work in parks and creating change. So the agenda for today is the opening and welcome, which we've had. I'm going to spend a bit of time sort of framing what we mean by placemaking and how that connects to nature in urban spaces. And then we have some wonderful guest speakers that are going to sort of talk about the work that they do, and they're from across Canada, and I'll introduce them later. And then there'll be some time for questions and closing remarks at the end. So to get started, what is placemaking and how does this connect to climate action, nature-based solutions, and urban green space? So placemaking is a participatory approach to the planning, design, and management of public spaces, harnessing the ideas and assets of local communities to create areas that are inclusive to and representative of them. Placemaking for me is both an action or a process, as described in this definition, as well as a result. So by interacting with places and having agency in our parks, we encourage and inspire environmental sustainability. And those places begin to have value to us that perhaps they did not have before. Park-based organizations, like the panelists today, are often the place-making links between communities and parks that create the opportunities for connection with nature. They work to make green spaces inclusive, which in turn contributes to community resilience. The other framing question is why urban green spaces? Why parks in cities? So globally, most people are urban, and therefore urban areas are where climate change impacts are more likely to be experienced. In Canada, 81.75% of us live in urban centers, and that's the latest statistics from Stats Canada from 2024. Nature-based solutions are methods that use nature and natural processes to tackle challenges affecting people and their environments. Examples of nature-based solutions include urban parks and other things like green roofs, wetlands, and bioswales. Urban nature-based solutions can address multiple challenges: climate change and biodiversity loss, disaster risk, water and food security, human health and well-being, and socioeconomic development. When we involve community placemaking as the means by which to achieve nature-based solutions or climate action, we amplify that impact. So not only are we addressing climate challenges, we're contributing to individuals' well-being and building community. We need to acknowledge two things around nature-based solutions. So the first is that nature-based solutions is a very human-centric model, asking in many ways what nature can do for humans, and it doesn't fully capture the intrinsic values of nature. And additionally, when we speak about human health and well-being, we must call attention to different worldviews and acknowledge that what we consider well-being is also always evolving. Effective urban green spaces are more than just measurable numbers of trees or a certain number of acres of land. They can be more holistic, including the quality and variety of opportunities for human-nature relationships, as well as inclusion of cultural values. Myself and my colleagues at Park People have two programs that I'm going to share with you today. So one is called the Canadian Cities Parks Report, and the other is the Cornerstone Parks Program. And I'm going to share a bit more information about these programs that will explore the idea of nature connectedness through placemaking in the context of environmental and community resilience. So the first program I'll share with you is called the Canadian Cities Parks Report. And this is an annual survey conducted by Park People with municipal parks and recreation staff, as well as the public. I've pulled some of the findings that will bring forward the municipal experience when it comes to addressing climate change and community engagement in parks. So cities across Canada are feeling the effects of climate change on a daily basis, with increased damage from extreme weather, including heat, drought, fire, wind, and flooding occurring more frequently. And I'm sure, as everyone here is aware, the news across Canada this summer has demonstrated this point. Almost all cities and municipal staff surveyed, so 94% of the folks that we surveyed, indicated that combating the effects of climate change presented a challenge for them. However, municipalities are taking actions to including increasing green infrastructure to manage stormwater, increasing native plants to better adapt to a changing climate, and establishing heat maps to ensure that investments in greening districts are allocated where they're most needed. 60% of municipal staff said that they felt equipped with the knowledge and tools to address climate change through their work in parks. However, the research also found that many cities were approaching climate resilience on an ad hoc or project by project basis, rather than as a part of an overall strategy. City residents, 87% of our respondents, have a strong desire to be more involved in parks, whether through attending park programs or engaging in advocacy. However, cities face resourcing challenges in meeting the demand for park programs directly. In the past 5 years of running the Canadian Cities Parks report, we have found that there have been no noted budgetary increases to volunteer and community engagement programs. The majority of municipal employees said that they had formed strong connections with citizen groups working in parks, but they also said that the city did not have sufficient resources to support them. When city staff were asked how they support citizen groups, many cited one-off processes and projects rather than an ongoing or a systematic approach. Although these measures can be useful for creating new arrangements, they do not support citizen groups over the long term, which can lead to professional burnout for both city staff as well as burnout among volunteers in park-based organizations. Community park groups that organize events and activate local parks play a vital role in expanding opportunities for residents to get involved, but many of these groups are not feeling adequately supported by their municipalities. Only 39% of community park groups said that they had a strong relationship with their municipality. So investing in building relationships with these groups to better meet their needs is one way to address this challenge and create more avenues for residents to get involved. This brings us to one of Park People's programs called the Cornerstone Park Program, which engages large urban parks across Canada. The Cornerstone Park Program works with large urban and park-based organizations. These organizations are often filling a gap that municipalities struggle to meet. They provide ongoing programs, building and maintaining those relationships with communities, and they provide ways for people to engage in climate action through restoration and stewardship work. Now, we know that recreation has historically been seen as the primary way that parks benefit human health, especially physical health. However, our research found that stewardship and nature programs, which are often unique to large urban parks, have an even greater impact on people's health and happiness than traditional recreation. We ran a survey, and we have over the last few years, with volunteers that are involved in stewardship programs. And so these are some of the results. So 99% of stewards indicated that stewardship activities make them happy and satisfied. 97% of respondents agreed that their participation contributed to their mental well-being. Further, the greatest predictor of better health was nature connectedness, suggesting that stewardship is a critical activity to foster nature connection and therefore better health. Participants tell us that stewardship is a part of injury recovery, integrating themselves into new communities, and that it calms eco-anxiety. This dimension of large urban parks inextricably links ecology and human well-being and supports the need for more stewardship and nature connection opportunities that support healthier people and ecosystems, particularly in equity-deserving communities. We see these trends replicated throughout the large urban parks that we work with. So the research makes it really clear stewardship and nature connection programs support happiness, life satisfaction, improves mental health and physical health, and cultivates human-nature connection, creating a virtuous cycle, particularly in the face of climate change. Now, we understand that the benefits of participating in park stewardship programs are not shared equitably. As shown in this slide, the majority of park users are white, cisgendered women, and are able-bodied. And you can see in the last stat that 59% of those who identify as visible minorities feel strongly connected to nature, but that is compared to 73% of white park users. So they're ready to apply an environmental justice lens to this work and ensure that the health and ecological benefits of large urban parks and their programming are accessible to equity-deserving communities. Additionally, there's an opportunity to expand opportunities for human-nature connectedness through non-traditional urban green spaces. So through adaptive reuse projects like hydro corridors, former landfills, and small urban parks and linear parks. So why does this matter now? The pandemic made the mental and physical health benefits of parks more clear than ever to park users and showed that urban green spaces are essential to life in cities. 43% of people living in Canadian cities report that they never see their neighbors. The odds of connecting with neighbors is 5 times higher for those who visit high-quality green spaces than for those who don't or can't. So what our programs and data show, and I've tried to show it in this little sort of diagram here, is that cities know they need to plan for and incorporate nature-based solutions into urban green spaces to create more resilient cities. Cities also know that there's public support and people want to be involved in these activities, but there's a lack of financial infrastructure and capacity to engage citizens. Park-based organizations, like the ones that support large urban parks, fill that gap by providing opportunities for placemaking through nature connection and engaging people in park stewardship on an ongoing basis. Being involved in stewardship is incredibly beneficial for people for all the reasons we've mentioned and creates that nature connectedness as well as connections to each other. This then increases community and ecosystems resilience. So now not only have I planted trees or removed invasive species, I've also had some physical activity. I have also met my neighbors. So the next time there's a heat wave or the power goes out, I have a green space that I'm familiar with and that I know how to access in order to cool down. And I also have those relationships and social connections that I need so that I can reach out for support or reach out in order to provide support. The panelists we have today are these placemakers. They're the folks who are connecting nature and community. They're filling that gap in engagement that cities often struggle to address. They're engaging communities in parks and public spaces, not only through stewardship activities, but also through the arts and food and culture. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and I'll ask that our panelists turn on their cameras so we can meet them. That's great. And I'm just going to start off. So, I'm going to share my screen one more time. Sorry. This is everyone will love this. We're here. So thank you. You'll know how to find me. And I have to say a thank you to the supporters for Park People that support the programs that we do. And here are our panelists. So everyone's got their cameras on, so I'll stop sharing again. But we have Erica, Ima, and Vincent, and everyone here is with organizations from across Canada, which is amazing. And I will let everyone introduce themselves. And then we have some questions for the panelists, and I have some photos from the work that they do. So I'll share those again when we get to that. So I will pass it over to Erica to introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you, Joy. I really appreciate it. Yeah, always appreciate the work of Parks People and appreciate those visuals and numbers that are so impactful. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. And hello, everyone. My name is Erica. I use she, her pronouns. I am of Japanese and mixed European ancestry, so I'm calling in today as a settler and uninvited guest here on Squamish Nation territory, which is just north of so-called Vancouver, BC. So for me, it's a bit earlier in the day today. It's morning. And yeah, I am the co-executive director at the Environmental Youth Alliance. So we work with equity deserving youth on Vancouver's east side, activating parks and engaging in stewardship, land-based education and employment training programs with the youth. And I'll probably talk a lot more, so I will leave it there.
Great. Ima, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Ima Essen. I'm a cultural planner with Steps Public Art. I'm joining you today from Toronto, my hometown, Treaty 13 and Dish with One Spoon territory. Steps Public Art is a Canadian charity and social enterprise, and we offer services in public art management, hoarding exhibits, cultural and strategic planning, and artist capacity building. So I'm fortunate in that in addition to providing these services, I get to work on deeply community engaged projects and programs, which allow me to interact with folks on the ground and engage in creative cultural opportunities. One of my favorite opportunities is our From Weeds We Grow program, which is now in its 4th year, rooted in Roundtree Mills Park in the northwest end of Toronto. But I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that. I guess I'll pass the mic to Vincent.
Thank you, Ima. My name is Vincent. I am a project manager at the Centre d'Écologie Urbaine. We are based in Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal. And I work mostly in our projects involving climate change adaptation. In the Centre d'Écologie Urbaine, our whole goal is to put people front and center into the transformation of cities and to propose practices and policies to make our cities greener, safer, and more inclusive in general.
Great, thank you, everyone. So the first question that I have for each of you, and we could go in the same order and feel free to build on each other's answers, is sort of each of you are coming at the work that you do from a different perspective. So what does placemaking mean in your work? And what are the entry points towards working with the community? Sort of where do you begin your process when you're working with community?
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, I really appreciated how you articulated placemaking, and I think that really set the tone. So EYA, we, as I mentioned, we work with equity denied youth on Vancouver's underserved East Side communities. So if we're looking at an intersectional lens on environmental and social justice, which you kind of alluded to, Joy, you know, we're recognizing that these are youth that are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, et cetera. And they're also systemically excluded from conversations and opportunities to be leaders in this space. So in working with youth facing barriers, we're working with urban Indigenous youth, BIPOC youth, immigrant, Two-Spirit, LGBTQIA youth, youth living with disability, et cetera. And we're engaging them in land-based education and environmental youth employment training programs, ultimately to connect to land, to steward spaces, particularly doing these in East Side neighborhoods of Vancouver, which have been historically underserved and denied equity and resources to do so. So like you were saying, Joy, really engaging in that stewardship and tapping into the benefits both for a community and a landscape that is not very climate resilient right now, as well as supporting the youth and kind of connecting through that process. And then maybe just to touch just briefly on your entry points piece of the question. You know, working with youth, it really comes to relationships. You know, they can they see things as they are, and they keep things real for us, I guess. So we work really hard to build trusting relationships with the youth that we work with. EY has been around since 1989, and since then we've been very embedded in the Vancouver landscape. We do a lot of partnership programs with the alternative schools in Vancouver and engage with other community organizations and schools. Because of this, word of mouth is really kind of our entry point now. We have a lot of youth that continue to come back and grow into leadership roles in our programs, and they're bringing their siblings and their friends. So yeah, we really cherish and lean into those relationships as our entry point.
That's great. Thank you. I can imagine that the youth that you work with just say how it is. So that's awesome. I'll go to you, Ima, with the same sort of questions. So what does placemaking mean in your work, and what are your entry points to working with community?
I mean, Erica is a tough act to follow here, but you know, for me, it's really about amplifying existing voices and connections. So the focus is empowering folks to leverage their own strengths and the existing community capacity. If you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard this phrase come out of my mouth. We're not making anything. We're not reinventing the wheel, but rather acting as a conduit to empower individuals and communities to deepen their connections to places that are important to them. At STEPS, which is really lucky for me because it aligns with my own values, but at this organization, we align this work with supporting equity-deserving people, communities, and groups. And of course, as an arts organization, we use the arts as a way to connect with nature and each other. I feel like I'm going to kind of just copy Erica here, but in terms of entry points, right? Every project is different, but I too take pride in tailoring projects and programs to respond directly to the community's stated goals and desires, again, with a focus on those voices that aren't always at the table. In the case of our project up in Roundtree Mills Park, we've got a significant racialized, marginalized, and newcomer community. And I do take pride in ensuring that they are included in the conversation and responding directly to any, using the arts to respond directly to any challenges they may face. But again, that first step is always building trust. And people always ask, how do you do that? Well, it's talking to people, not at them. It's showing up at those smaller local gatherings when invited and treating every encounter as a learning opportunity, right? There's always that chance to reformulate what we've heard and kind of treat this as an iterative process versus the experts coming in and taking over. In my experience, this approach has proved very successful, specifically when working with equity-deserving and newcomer groups, as you will see in the From Weeds We Grow project when we talk about that later on. On that note, I'll hand it back to you, Joy.
That's great. Thanks, Ima. I had the pleasure of visiting Roundtree for the first time just last weekend, so got to meet some folks in the community, and it was really, really lovely, and it's amazing to see how invested people are in that space. So I'll pass it over to you, Vincent. Again, same question. So what's placemaking mean in your work, and what are your entry points to working with community?
Oh, speaking of tough acts to follow, I feel like, yes, I have I feel a bit of pressure. Thank you a lot for having me over here. For me, I think it's a little bit, I'm going to repeat a bit everything that was said in terms, especially of trust, and especially in terms, this really resonated with me in terms of building trust with your communities. Our perspective at the Centre d'Écologie Urbaine is often a little bit different because we work with communities all over the province. So we're not necessarily always the best organization to work directly with the community, but that's also something you sometimes need to recognize, that maybe there's some organizations that know more about the community you want to work with, and maybe you should ally yourself with those organizations. But what we really do in terms of placemaking is putting people first and forward into the process and having them involved from A to Z. So we plan our spaces with the community. We go meet people where they are, and we ask them what their needs are, because we recognize that there's an expertise in the lived experience of people that experience a place. And we want to get to that knowledge and then come in with our knowledge of how to make that happen, how to make a park happen, how to make a public space happen, and to merge those two types of knowledge. And that's really the basis of our work. We call that a participatory urban planning process that we've been doing for quite a while. That's what we use for our flagship project, Sous les Pavés, which is inspired by Deep Paved Paradise by Green Communities Canada, where we take asphalt out of communities all across Quebec, and we do it with the communities. So we plan the sites, we take the asphalt by hand out of those sites with the communities, and having them involved throughout the process really creates a link to the specific placemaking that we're doing in all of those little different projects. So we really try to imagine the whole cities as a different approach and take the asphalt out of everywhere we can and make new green, thriving places and make tiny little parks everywhere so everyone can actually have access to green spaces near their homes.
That's great. Thank you, Vincent. And so the next question that I have for everyone is, how do you cultivate a sense of belonging and sense of care for the land through the work that you do? So, a lot of what we're talking about is how people connect to each other, but as well as to the nature that's around them. And that can be difficult in cities. It can be difficult for different populations who, newcomer populations in Canada. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you do that, how you cultivate a sense of care for land that we know can be so valuable to our own well-being. And I'll start with you again, Erica.
Yeah, such a beautiful and big question. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to really connect with, we're all talking kind of urban parks here. And I think sometimes we can think of nature as out there, it's disconnected, it's inaccessible, and what have you. And I think, I really appreciate, Vincent, what you were saying of like, everyone should access it. It should be everywhere. And I think that's the start of just like, hey, look down the street from, your neighborhood and, there's a space right there that is nature. We are all nature, and we can build community and build connection through that. So the programs that we run at EYA, we have our high school age land-based education programs, and then we have kind of a 18 to 25-year-olds can engage in more employment training and skills training programs. And in all of those programs, we're kind of focusing on native plant horticulture, where we're growing native plants and then planting them and learning about them. We do rewilding or stewardship work where we're removing invasive species and learning about that. And then a big piece also is Indigenous plant knowledge and Indigenous worldviews and knowledge systems. So all of those are kind of integrated in our programs through learning activities, hands-on stewardship tasks, play-based learning, as well as learning directly from Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders. But kind of how all of that comes together and how do we kind of build a sense of belonging and connection to land. I mean, to really draw on the wisdom of our host nations in Vancouver. So that's the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, as well as other Indigenous knowledge is, that idea of relationality and reciprocity. So we're building relationships continuously with each other, with the land, with the plants, and we are in reciprocity. They teach us so much through our programs, and we're giving back and tending to them in the way that we know best to. And I think that relationality piece too, we kind of play the long game at UA where we do a lot of cohort-based season-long programs. So the youth are engaging in just 1 or 2 spaces directly. They might come once a week for 10 weeks in a season, and they're with the same group of, let's say, 10 youth, and revisiting that same place with the same people, tending to the space and really building a strong relationship with the place. And then they might come back next season and kind of see the changes and continue to tend to the space. So that piece really supports us, with the trust building, with the relationship building, and then ultimately feeling a sense of connection and pride about a space that they've been tending to as well.
That's great. I love that. There's a sense of like returning to something and really building that relationship over time with a particular space. That's really, I really love that. Ima, I know you work a lot in the arts, right? So you're bringing sort of an artistic and arts lens to the work that you do. So how do you cultivate a sense of belonging and care for the land with the work that you do?
I mean, of course, I have something written out here, but something Erica mentioned just is rolling around in my head. And it's really that idea of returning to the same space over and over again. And I can say that with these land-based projects, that has probably been one of the things that makes it so successful. We go to the same spot in the same park next to the same river every year, multiple times, to the point where people who want to join us, if they're returning, they're just like, they call it their spot. Are we going to our usual spot? Right? And I think that's really important. And that's a lesson that I've learned, right? You can't just pick it up and move it somewhere else. That relationship is to that land. I have a favorite tree, the river says hello to me. It's wonderful. But, when we talk about belonging, I think that ties into kind of the previous question, which is really leaning into what Vincent said about participatory planning, responding to those needs and desires that the community has stated, and using whatever tools we have. Again, for me, we're an arts organization. So our tools are creative workshops. We engage local Indigenous artists and elders as well to root the programming in those land-based teachings, making space for people to create in the way that's best for them, less top-down, more ground up. But I think another thing that's been rolling around in my head, I always have notes and then I go off script. The other thing that's been rolling around in my head is this, in terms of these relationships to the land and deliberately engaging with newcomer or marginalized communities, folks whose cultures perhaps aren't rooted in this land. There's always a relationship to land, always. And that kind of, if you view that as a way for people to connect and then offer them an opportunity to connect to this new land, it's so gratifying, right? And acknowledging the contributions of our local Indigenous communities through engaging elders and artists. And again, bringing those same people back year after year. We're not just switching it up, right? These are long-term relationships. But yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is it's really about creating space for those conversations. And I think letting things flow a bit more organically than we often see. And I can say from a personal experience, it can be a little bit more stressful not to have everything lined up and prescribed, but that's where the magic happens. So that's been a big learning for me over the course of the last few years.
I love that. And I love the idea of like, we all have a connection to land, whether it's right here, or somewhere else or wherever we came from, but that we can, create that value. And if we are, in a new place to us and through organizations like yours, like have helped to actually do that and find those ways to connect. I really love that. And Vincent, I know like you have such an interesting approach with the work that you do, where you're actually like ripping out asphalt, from urban spaces. So, I mean, you really do connect to the land in a very, very different way. So I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts on this question and, how do you get people to connect through the land through the work that you're doing?
I think I'm going to use part of Ima's response about creating opportunities. I think this is such a nice way to frame it. Give opportunities for people to get involved into their placemaking. And it reminds me of when we were working in a city called Boisbriand, which is in the greater Montreal area. I was helping them with the DPAVE project. And there was a city councilor that was there, that had been there for the depaving part, that was there planting trees and plants and shrubs. And she was talking with her colleagues, and she was like, you know what? I'm having so much fun, and this feels so different. We approve so many projects, and we're on the board, and we do all these things. But this place, I care so much about it because I've actually helped build it. I took out the asphalt, I planted a tree. I want to know what's going to happen with this space. I want to take care of it. So I think what my answer is yeah, giving opportunities for people to actually transform the space with their own hands. It really does give out a sense of belonging. But also, if we circle back to what we were saying about the needs of the population, is giving them the opportunity as well to talk about what they want from that space, what they like in that space, what they like to do, and find ways to reach out to get those answers from your community. And I so enjoyed, Erica, when you were talking about stewardship and maintenance over time, going back. And I think that's something we often don't think about in the environmental projects where we plant trees. We say we planted a tree and that's good. But if you want to keep involving your community, you have to think about maintenance, about how to do it with the people. And that's what we did on our Blue-Green Alley project. And we have some members of the community that don't have any space to garden, and they're so excited because we give them an opportunity to garden inside of their city and have this connection with the Blue-Green Alley, which is in their neighborhood where there's plants, and they have this ability to transform it a little bit every time they come. So I think I like the aspect of maintenance and stewardship in that sense.
It's this idea of like having a long-term relationship with a space that's near you. That's really great. And I love the idea of people coming back to see changes over time. And you really do, even I know myself, it's like I talk about my park, that's so it's like I feel a great sense of ownership over this little piece of grass, across the street from me. So it's really important though. So I'm going to ask Erica a question, and I'm going to see if I can share my screen again because I have some photos from the work that you do. This is a lot of technology for me. So here we go. So Erica, the question for you is, you work at the intersection of environment, advocacy, social and environmental justice. So what do you think the impacts are for youth to be involved in environmental actions and placemaking? And then the second part of this, and I can ask it again, is how are youth shaping the environmental and social justice space in Canada? So, and I've got another slide here, so you can let me know, and I can switch to the other one too when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just to share maybe what's happening in this photo, this is one of our programs, our Youth Habitat Crew, which tends to our spaces in the summer. And over the last 3 or so years, we've been in collaboration with Strathcona Community Gardens. We were developing and stewarding Vancouver's newest wetland. So Strathcona is a neighborhood that is very underserved and is not equipped to be climate resilient. And flooding was a really big issue, and the roads kept on cracking and breaking because the water was telling us it was meant to be there. And historically, the water was there. It was a beautiful tidal flat zone before the CN rail and infilling and everything, what have you. So we listened to the land that wanted to be water and developed this wetland this is our pond liner kind of going in the bottom to support us in holding water. But now, if any of you are in Vancouver, I encourage you to take a walk through Strathcona Park. And it is a thriving wetland. We have wildlife that have come back, and the plants are thriving. So it was a really cool moment of listening to the land, and yes, it was the right thing to do, and it's much happier and much more biodiverse now. But anyways, that photo just made me smile, so tangent there. But to your question, so yeah, what are the impacts for youth to be involved in environmental actions? I mean, I think your stats are really similar, Joy, to some of the kind of the surveying that we do around mental health impacts. So, you know, at a baseline, it's clear that being in community and connecting to others and taking care of land does create a lot of positive benefits in the youth. And I was having a conversation with one of our youth programs a couple months ago, and they're one of our leadership groups. And I was like, eco-anxiety is big and devastating and so challenging. How do we want to approach that subject with the participants and the younger youth, and you know what feels meaningful? And we had a really great discussion about it, but really what it boiled down to, and they said it kind of point blank, is like getting our hands in the soil, like feeling like we are doing something and engaging with each other and touching the land and feeling, yeah, a part of the bigger picture made them feel, you know, less kind of small and daunted by these really big ideas. So, you know, yes, we'll talk about it directly. Yes, we have some other arts-based approaches to, you know, working through some of the challenges, but in the end, it's, yeah, really about hands in the soil. So that was some wisdom from the youth that really stuck with me. And I think kind of all of these pieces of, you know, the impacts on youth, I think particularly in this day and age, with everything going on, yeah, digitally and all the other impacts, and like the world is a really challenging place to be growing up as a young person these days. So having these moments away from our phones and connecting person to person is really important. And I think particularly important for that kind of placemaking piece that we're talking about so much today, particularly with urban Indigenous youth that through systems of oppression have been displaced from their lands and territories, immigrant youth, refugees, etc. So learning about and connecting to the stories of the land that we're on and each other is really, yeah, supporting kind of nervous systems and sense of belonging there as well. But yeah, I guess you asked another question too, so maybe we can change the slide and flow into that.
Yeah.
These are just more of our incredible youth on our programs, learning and stewarding the spaces. And the question you asked was, yeah, how youth are shaping the environmental and social justice space in Canada. I think what's so rad is that they are imagining a better future for themselves than what we have built for them. And through that, they're so wise and so creative, and they're really demanding more. And I think there's just some really exciting energy behind that, and really standing up for what they believe they deserve, and you know how previous generations may have not set them up for success in those ways. So it's really exciting to witness, and it's also really important for people in positions of power to remember that they are wise and creative, and they are creating this future that they want to see. And there's so many inequities for youth to get a seat at that table and to really kind of move that momentum forward. So, you know, I talked earlier about particularly youth that face barriers are, you know, most impacted by these crises, and also systemically excluded from these. So I think it's a really important reminder for all of us to continue to center and amplify and support youth to really build this incredible future that they're seeing for themselves.
It's great, thank you. It actually sounds very hopeful, which is lovely, right? Like I think the ability to take action can create that type of hope, and yeah, sort of address some of those feelings of anxiety that are really being felt, I think, throughout for a lot of youth, and as well as adults. I'll move to Ima now, and I have some photos from the work that you do. So the question we had for you is sort of, how do we move from placemaking to placekeeping? So, you know, how do you know you've been successful and know when your work is, and I don't know if you can see me, but using like air quotes, like when is our work done, you know? So as not-for-profit charity organizations in this field, ideally we work ourselves out of our work, but how do we know when we've done it?
Well, first of all, I think Erica could have answered this question based on that. Wonderful. I think you hit on so many relevant points here, but I guess I'll start with a description of what you're seeing. So this is the workshop space that we return to for every one of our From Weeds We Grow events. It's next to the Humber River, and what you're seeing here is Lindsay Lickers. Her creation name is Mushkiki Nibi Kwe. And she's leading us in a teaching. She's teaching us a little bit about the heartberry teaching, or the strawberry, as well as tobacco. She has shared the story of Sky Woman and how that fits in, but I'm not going to get too far into that. But this is what I mean about just returning to the same spot and keeping it simple. These folks showed up because they were curious to learn more. Lindsay's been with this program since the beginning. She's been with the program since before I was with the organization. So there's a relationship being built there between her and the land, her and the participants, and the participants in the land, which is just really wonderful to see. I mean, this looks successful to me, right? Like, I'm looking at this image and you almost think it can't get any better. But I think overall, with the projects and programs that I get to lead, success is when the community has acquired new knowledge and skills and connections. They feel empowered. They feel like they can make a difference. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to provide a foundational teaching that everyone can connect to. And that ties back into my earlier statement about how all cultures have a connection to their land, whether or not it's this land. But what you're seeing here is from last year's From Weeds We Grow programming. We called that one the Heartberry series. So Lindsay here is sharing the teaching. This was followed by strawberry pin beating session on the same day in the same spot. And it really kind of focusing on that teaching really allowed us to learn a little bit more about the importance of healing ourselves and each other. And it allowed us to reflect. I mean, 2023, not that 2024 is a great year, but 2023 was tough. Okay, there was a lot of conflict worldwide. There was a lot of worldwide pain. And interestingly, my learnings from this is suddenly the strawberries this year came up earlier than they normally do. So, I mean, if you believe it, that the land is telling you, that the land can tell you things, which I do, it was acknowledging the pain and saying, here, guys, you need this. You're going to need to heal. You're going to need to get your, you're going to have to bone up, because we're going to struggle a little bit here, and it's going to be painful. Sorry, but the next image, if you want to move forward, this is really exciting to me. So the cherry on top of the sundae of the Heartberry series last year was a placemaking ground mural, or a landmarking. What you're seeing here is the community co-creating it, coming out to paint with us. Again, Lindsay led the design as well. She shared a lot about her particular style of painting through this hands-on kind of co-creation. Not only is the teaching solidified, but there comes that ownership of space. What I think is really important about this, and I want to highlight, is this site was not just chosen arbitrarily. This was the result of quite a few conversations with quite a few community groups. I'm not going to get into specifics because this is a national broadcast, so you probably won't know all their names. But this is located at one of the entrances to the Humber River Trail, which is heavily used by local walking groups, both seniors, newcomers, cyclists, etc. But it wasn't particularly well marked. But I think that this is even more impactful than a sign, right? And I'll turn back to what I said earlier about the language folks use, right? In that process of choosing the site, determining whether it was appropriate, whether they thought it would help them, whether they wanted to do it, that took about, like, I mean, again, I have ongoing relationships with these folks, but for this one alone, it was like 6 months of conversations. So getting out there and then co-creating it, once again, when people talk about it, it's not, oh, the mural, it's our mural. And that's what, I know maybe it's just semantics, maybe it's just a word, but you can feel that ownership, right? And in kind of connecting that with a land-based teaching, that also deepens, really focuses on that environmental stewardship piece. But I will acknowledge that as an arts organization, like I don't do we don't technically do land stewardship in the traditional sense. So that ties into Vincent's comment about connecting with other organizations. And in Toronto, there's a group called Toronto Nature Stewards, who we're going to be working closely with this year, because they're going to be doing that plant-based work in the park. And, it's just, hey, how can we work together? Is there something we can do from an arts perspective that's kind of in my wheelhouse that can complement your work and vice versa? So I think, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think that ownership, that sense of empowership, that's how we move from that placemaking to placekeeping. Really, that it's theirs. It's not mine. It's not an arbitrary object. They've co-created it physically as well as with, all the planning. So it allows them to care for and take pride in their space, or their place, excuse me. It's no longer a space, it's a place.
It's a place, that's right. Yeah. I think it's interesting though too that you talk about, the work you do is not stewardship in the traditional sense, but I wonder, and you don't have to answer this, I'm just wondering out loud about sort of the way that art and creative process important role for arts and creativity to foster that stewardship. Like we can expand what we mean by stewardship, right? In terms of caring for the land, and not everybody's going to plant a tree or, pull out an invasive species, but through, sort of other processes, I think it really is stewardship, to, sort of have creativity on the land. I think that's actually really, really important.
Well, what I will say is I think the land likes us. That park likes us. Because it'll, even if it's calling for rain, I'm going to knock on wood, it doesn't rain, right?
It's good. You've got a good reciprocal relationship.
Yes, right? So I feel strongly that relationship has been built. And again, it's been based on mutual respect and benefiting both sides.
That's beautiful. I love it. I'm going to share one of Vincent's photos now. So we're sort of moving the conversation from, like, how do we get involved? How do we maintain sort of placemaking and have sort of agency for communities? So for you, Vincent, are there best practices, for community placemaking, regardless of the type of, space or place? If could be a park, it could be other types of public spaces. And how do we sort of action these best practices in the work that we do? And you can speak to your photo as well.
Yeah, what you're seeing right now is a photo from our project Sous les Pavés. So you can see people using their own hands to rip up the asphalt. We do cut it beforehand so that there's no dangerous tools around people, but it's you can see how much joy it can bring when people rip out the asphalt themselves. In terms of best practices, I would go with 3 key areas. I would say flexibility, transparency, and time. If you want to do placemaking, it requires participation. It requires a lot of time. And you have to allow for more time to connect with the people, to build the trust and the relationship, which is in itself could last years. But if you're making a project, still do make time to get to know your community. Go look at the census, go talk with community organizations, meet the people where they are. We often like to do kiosks. We have a huge bike kiosk, which we call La Bicane ID, the idea bike, we would say. And it's just a kiosk we can travel with, and we go where the people are, in the parks, in the public space. And I think it's a great tool to meet the people where they are and meet the users of a particular space. But it does require more time, especially if you want to make it meaningful. My second point is flexibility. You have to be open to getting this much input from your community. If you don't come in with an open mind, it won't work. People have to know that that their voice is going to be heard. And so you need to be able to adapt the answers. And in some cases, you have to be able to hear a no, with Sous les Pavés, we were in a community. We proposed a project to make things greener, but people really liked their parking lot and didn't want green and plants. And we had to say, yeah, okay, good. That's if the space is what you want, keep it that way. That's the whole goal of this. So you have to be very flexible in that term. And the last point that I'm bringing is transparency. People that participate in your project have to know how much leeway they have, how much creativity can they have. You have to be really transparent about what power they have and what are the limitations. But it also creates agency for people when they know exactly what power they have. So for example, if you come into a space and you say, we can do whatever we want, but the owner doesn't want fruit trees, but the rest is okay. So you get at least a common base. And so people can dream inside of their little sandbox, maybe we'll call it a sandbox. Yeah. So that's what I would say. And in terms of tools, there's a lot of resources that are already available that you can, there's nothing that you need to imagine. There's a lot of activities that are been already taught out by a lot of different people. So just, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, but you do need to take the appropriate time to work with your community.
I'm just going to share the other photo that you had if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, this is the Blue-Green Alley. So it's an alley next to the Bâtiment 7, which is a community organization that fought for about 20 years to get the ownership of that building and have a space for the community by the community. It's a great space. If you don't know anything about it, you can learn more online. And we wanted to manage rainwater in this alleyway next to the building. And so what we did is that we went with the community and we tried to make a plan that would satisfy everyone. And it was hard because a lot of people didn't want wanted all green space, but some people were like, but we want actually a meeting place for people to come together. And we want also the building to be accessible universally. So we had to square all those needs together, and it made a picture that was probably not what any one individual wanted, but that everybody could rally behind. But that was, we offered, I think, 5 options before coming up with this final version. So we had a lot of back and forth to see what was acceptable and what was the best project for that particular community. And it is a great space. That's only the second year of growth. So we planted last summer, and this is after only a year of growth. So we're actually quite proud of that project.
It looks amazing. And I appreciate the idea of, going to community and maybe not necessarily hearing what you thought you were going to hear, sort of, as an organization needing to be able to adapt and be flexible and maybe let go of some of your own sort of preconceived notions about what you think would be great in a space. And so it's really, really powerful, though, for communities to actually be heard, right, in their spaces, and then which, in turn, leads to that sort of ownership and investment in space. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Here we all are. Tashaila, can I do a time check with you, or how are we?
Like right on. So we're good for time. I could, if there's questions or additional comments that you all would like to touch on before I bring some questions forward from the chat, I'll hold space for that right now.
The last question that I had was just, to let us know how people can find you, engage in your work, if there's any other sort of programs or initiatives that you really want to talk about or highlight. I'd welcome you to sort of do that now, and then maybe Tashaila can, start fielding some of the questions from the folks that are listening.
I can jump in pretty quick. Yeah, I mean, we're continuing in Vancouver, stewarding our spaces in Strathcona and along the Renfrew Ravine, one of Vancouver's daylighted streams. So encourage you to pop in, say hello if you're around. And yeah, I'll pop in the chat maybe just some links. The best ways to keep in touch with us are heading to our website, EYA.ca, and signing up for our newsletter, as well as following us on different socials. Instagram, we're fairly active on, and you get to see wonderful photos of updates from our youth programs engaging in the spaces. So recommend if you're scrolling and want to see some joy in your scroll, it's a nice one there. But yeah, I just look forward to keeping in touch and encourage everyone to, advocate for your communities and the public spaces that are meaningful to you, support your local nonprofits, amplify the youth voices in your community. And if you're struggling with eco-anxiety, get your hands in the soil, like the youth said. So I'll leave it there. Maybe I'll pass it to Ima.
I actually have my own little urban garden, which I've just sort of created. I have containers everywhere all over the porch, but then I have like these little gorilla patches. Don't tell. It's totally not me, but I am looking forward to getting my hands dirty today. So yeah, I mean, I'll share a few, some direct links in the chat as well. But as a reminder, I work with an organization called Steps Public Art. While our offices are located in Toronto, we do operate nationally. The project that I've been speaking of today from Weeds We Grow is ongoing this year. We're in our 4th year. So I have some opportunities coming up to do some park-based poetry and spoken word on August 17th and 18th. We're also going to be back in the park with a local facilitator to do a nature-based dance and movement workshop on August 25th. And all of those are always 12 to 4 at the same spot by the river. But I will show you, I'll send a few direct links for you as well. And shameless plug, you can go to our website and follow, sign up for our newsletter as well. And the Instagram is always really, really fun. Lots of art, lots of color. So thank you.
Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty. For me as well, I'll drop all the links in the chat. Unfortunately, as we are based in Quebec, most of our links are in French, so you'll have to brush up on your French if you want to get access to most of it. But we do have most of our participatory urban planning tools were built with Sustainable Calgary and the Center for Active Transportation that is based in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken. And this whole participatory urban planning toolbox and resources is available in both languages. So I'll at participatoryplanning.ca, but I'll put the link down in the description. But we do have Instagram as well. So sometimes if you know more about pictures, more not about words, just pictures can be good. So I'll drop the links in the chat.
Wonderful. And Joy, was there any other, I know park people, if there's the website, there's any links that come up for your end too, Joy, along with the rest of our amazing panelists today, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And as folks are engaging, a lot of questions came up throughout the session, some in the Q&A box. We had some questions flowing in from registration. One of these questions came up pretty earlier on in today's session. Joy, I believe this was around when you were sharing, how is stewardship defined or operationalized in terms of establishing connections with nature?
Oh, that's a great question. I invite anyone else to jump in too. In the context of the work that we've been doing through our Cornerstone Parks program, stewardship is sort of like direct action on the land, and it really is focused around tree planting and pulling invasive species. So those are the two sort of main activities that have been happening, and they're probably one of the sort of easier activities to get communities involved in. And so the groups that we've been working with have been running those types of volunteer programs for years, and we've helped them through a bit of like impact evaluation on their work, which is where I was able to sort of, get all of those from. So that's really the type we're talking about. But I think, there are many other things that could be considered stewardship as well. So those are not the only things. I think those are the things that come to mind, but there could be many other things too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joy. Did anybody else have anything else to add? The question, I could repeat it. How is stewardship defined or operationalized in terms of establishing connections with nature?
I mean, a really simple way for us, and I appreciate Joy saying, I'm Ima, by the way, Joy saying that it's not just those traditional activities, but, you know, we're an arts organization. We do public art, permanent public art installation. So it's really that selection of materials and being very aware that what may work on a vertical wall in the middle of a city is not appropriate for something along a ravine trail that will, you know, has a very significant risk or likelihood of runoff into the local water system. So, I mean, I realize, yeah, I think that that's really what I've been focusing on the last couple of years. And again, it's been a learning curve because the material selection is entirely different when working in concrete versus a park space.
Thank you so much, Ima. And I'm thinking of a common question that comes up in our mobilizers often is around the work that goes into supporting broader or larger communities and cities. How could that be applied to smaller spaces or smaller communities? So in terms of parks, is there any best practices from working in larger urban city spaces or places that could be applied to more smaller or residential parks?
That a question for me?
Oh, it's open to
It's open to everybody. Okay, great.
Oh.
I think one of the interesting things we found with our work is that you know, it's not necessarily quantity over quality. So even though, you know, the work we're doing is talking about large urban parks, you can create opportunities for really sort of in-depth quality connections with nature in small parks, in ravines, in hydro corridors, you know, sort of like in non-traditional, quote unquote, sort of park spaces. And so it's really about the type of engagement opportunities that are made available to folks that are sort of more important. Large urban parks definitely have, you know, a place when it comes to sort of like their ecological value and that sort of thing. But when we're talking about sort of creating placemaking and connecting with communities, it doesn't have to be, you know, the large urban park. And you know, not everybody living in Canadian cities has that opportunity. So we do need to expand, you know, how and where we create these opportunities so that people can access you know, space in their neighborhoods. Because ultimately, I think that's from, you know, everything that we've been hearing from folks today, like that's actually what creates the connection, right? Like it doesn't have to be a High Park or a Stanley Park. It can be, you know, the green alley behind my house that's now full of planter boxes, right? And that's what provides a lot of the sort of health benefits and you know, we're learning more and more about the ecological benefits of spaces like that too, in particular for pollinators and birds and insects. So, you know, there's value sort of in both ways.
Well, thank you so much, Joy. And I agree, there was a lot of examples shared throughout today's discussion that could easily be tied to or recognized as these best practices, but really leaning into connections and the ways that we engage communities. It sounds like that's been a common thread that has come up throughout. Thank you so much for highlighting that. Any other thoughts from folks around, I guess, that piece around what happens at larger parks and spaces, how that could be applied to more residential or smaller communities? Vincent?
Yeah, I think actually, I think it's easier sometimes to work in a smaller park than a larger park because larger parks will draw from a very large population, people will come from further away. So it's sometimes harder to understand and to know who use the park because there's a lot of different users, whether as a more local park, if I'm thinking the park next to my house, it's going to be a park for the people that live in the neighborhood. So you can actually really know your neighborhood well in advance of time and know who's going to use that park. And I think that people already, I'm thinking about my local park, there's always the same people that hang out in that park. I see these familiar faces. And so I think it's even easier to build relationships with the people that are actually using the space when it's a smaller park. So I think they're actually a better opportunity for placemaking sometimes than bigger parks that drawn to a larger population that has maybe less ownership over that park than smaller parks. So if you're trying to do some placemaking, maybe starting in smaller parks is actually a better idea.
And that ties beautifully into another question that came up. Ask you all, as a community association that has a dream of engaging, and for this question in particular, they mentioned engaging youth in their placemaking work. How can they start? If there's any tips that come to mind. So you mentioned that it could be a bit easier doing it in more residential settings. I'm taking that as maybe a good starting point. So any other thoughts come to mind around how to reach out to youth in general?
I can probably start us off. But yeah, maybe just building on that, I think really, going to them and stewarding their schoolyards or their neighborhood park or whatever it might be. Because sometimes stewardship can feel like a bit of a chore. So there needs to be that kind of connection and desire as kind of that starting point. So thinking about, where and what the youth care about and feel connected to, and building off that is a great standing point. But yeah, I hear you. And yeah, your dream is a beautiful dream. And I understand there's lots of hurdles as well. One thing that's been really effective for us is youth in leadership. So we have a youth advisory circle that's all youth program alumni. And they're kind of our feedback loop and leadership space where we bring questions, challenges that we're facing, and they'll kind of brainstorm and be our sounding board and ensure that kind of every move that we make is continuously youth-led. So yeah, and we also have, 50% of our board members are youth, and our staff team is very youthful as well. So, and that is maybe more directly our mission work, but I think at the least thinking through what kind of structures internally in your organization can you have youth voice and a youth seat at the table, and that will really support you in moving forward in a good way with your specific youth community. Because I don't know yet what your community might be facing, but the youth there. So really kind of lifting up their voices in ways that make sense in your organization or community.
Thank you, Erica. Over to you, Vincent.
Yes, I'll piggyback on Erica's response. We have another project at the Centre de l'Écologie Urbaine, which is not one of my projects, so I'll try to describe it as best as I can. It's called J'identifie, j'agis. And basically we go into schools, and with the youth, we identify places around the school that they would like us to change or to think together, and we plan for that particular change. So I remember a project that was done where some access to the school were considered a bit dangerous. So there was ground paintings that were done. There was some picnic tables that were installed and painted by the youth, and now the new hangout spot. So I think don't be afraid to listen to the youth and give the opportunities for youth to express themselves, and can start very early. In Sous les Pavés, we work with elementary school children, and we just go into the classrooms and explain the concept, and they grasp quite rapidly everything. And we often do this exercise where we ask them to just draw their, the schoolyard of their dream. And sometimes, yes, you'll have a lot of, dinosaurs and pools and a lot of things that you seem unrealistic, but that do tell you sometimes about some little needs. So for example, if there's a pool, maybe it means that they'd like some water, some were to be, during the summer, so it's a bit fresher. So you might think of, an installation that produces mist somewhere. Or if, there's dinosaurs, maybe there's like imagination you can put into there. So maybe there's a theme you can draw on the ground, some art that's missing, some installations. So there's a way to listen to kids and to help them make their vision sort of more of a reality and a more, down to earth sort of approach.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I'm hearing just creating opportunity for youth, for children to really bring their voices to the forefront, their ideas, and plug that into how we engage in the work and in these spaces. Thank you. Another question that comes up is, how can organizations that are engaged in this work pull in or tap into municipalities for support? These big questions. I'm going off of the facial reactions. And Ima, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. I mean, this is a multi-layered question, right? And I can only speak from my experience in Toronto, but there are quite a few, if we're talking about funding, there are quite a few funds that are administered by the City of Toronto, or funds that are managed by an outside source, but do originally come from the city. There's also, I mean, if we want to get political about it, your best ally is going to be your local councillors. They're going every day. And what you need is in order to get their, in order to have their support, you need to be able to speak for a large portion of their community, their constituents. If you want to keep going up, we've recently had success working with the provincial layer of government, and I'm not saying that it'll always turn into money, but you do have to acknowledge that these people have power. These positions are important in our society, and they can instigate change. So I think my answer is broader perhaps than the question requires, but it's really about forming those relationships and finding those allies, those collaborative partnerships, finding a common goal and pursuing that together as a group.
Thank you so much, Ima. Vincent, over to you.
I think Erica wants to speak. I'll let Erica go first.
I'll keep mine really short because it's, kind of echoing Ima, but a few other things. I mean, the work that park people are doing with kind of gathering the info and having these stats that are incredibly powerful are a great tool to showcase the meaning behind your work as well. And the other piece maybe that's floating through my head is we've talked a lot about, stewarding the same space and longevity. And those projects of maintenance and long-term stewardship are the hardest to get funding for. People always like brand new and shiny. So not an answer, but maybe just something, as we all are kind of echoing each other in that, is how do we advocate for more funding for these really meaningful, more long-term projects?
That is so true. On my part, what I've done a lot is policy analysis and trying to find ways in through cities, through their policies, their existing policies. Often what I've figured is that a lot of the policies are really broad and unactionable. And so a good way to try to convince city officials is to go and be, oh, you have a problem, I have the solution. And I know you have this problem because it is listed in so policy. And I think that's something that can be done by organizations like ours, but also citizen groups. That's something that policy analysis is not that complicated. And most of these are freely available documents. So I would go policy-wise, one way you can go about it, and making sure that what you're proposing is already in the books.
Yeah, and I would just echo everyone else here. And I love how strategic everyone is thinking about sort of those relationships. And I think, having sort of worked with municipalities through the research that Park People has done, it's, we understand that they're under a lot of pressure as well. And that really we do have a lot of common goals, when we're talking about, our park spaces and that sort of thing. So, as much as we talk about, sort of building that trust and relationship with the communities we work with, I think we need to do the same thing, you know, as sort of park-based organizations with, you know, our local counselors, folks, you know, our parks and recreation staff and all of that kind of thing. Because I think once you have those relationships as well, then it's much easier to move the needle forward on sort of the goals that you actually all share, right? Because as you've mentioned, it's like we do most of the time have the same goals when it comes to stewarding and caring for our spaces.
What a powerful note to wrap up today's session. Thank you each for such tangible and specific resources too. I know there's a lot of links floating in the chat, so I hope participants are able to paste them. I'm capturing them on our end, so we will be sure to share it in the follow-up email as well. But I just wanted to take some time to thank Joy, Vincent, Ima, Erica for the transparency today. Thank you for really speaking to each of your experiences and really painting a picture of what's happening in parks across Canada and the work that you're engaged with. For anybody who had some more questions popping up, I know each of you shared your contact information in the chat as well. So I would just open the floor to let folks know to reach out directly if there's any additional questions or reflections that come up. We also are sharing a feedback form in the chat available in both English and French, as we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's session as well. And next week, as a part of our community of practice, we'll be hosting a small community conversation around reconciliation. So for anybody interested, we will also share that link in the chat. So there'll be a few links popping up in the chat, but I'll make sure that we have it in the follow-up email as well. But just wanted to thank you all again for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure learning alongside each of you, and I'm really excited to see the work that continues in community. If there's any other thoughts that come up for folks, I'll leave a couple of minutes just for our speakers and our amazing panelists to share their closing remarks, and then we'll see you all at our next session. Over to you, speakers.
I'll just start by saying thank you so much to Erica and Vincent and Ima for joining us today. Park people, you know, so got to reach out through our network and friends of friends, and I really appreciate sort of the variety of perspective and work and sort of avenues that you use to, you know, connect people to their nature and environment and land. And yeah, I thought this was a really great conversation, and it felt very hopeful, which not all conversations, you know, about climate change, you know, and community resilience don't always feel this hopeful. So I really appreciate that that's the perspective that everybody brought today.
Well, second that. Thank you so much, Joy. Appreciate you all and wishing you an awesome rest of your day. Take care.